89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning and welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, several development-friendly bills could change the look of and life in Northeast Florida. We talked to an environmental advocate and an investigative reporter who's traced the proposed laws back to a New York hedge fund. Then, domestic violence in teen dating. We talked to a survivor about the realities and resources available. And a song first performed by 500 school children to celebrate Abraham Lincoln's birthday is restaged by the Children's Chorus at the annual Lift Every Voice and Sing concert. Join the conversation. Give us a call on air at 904-549-2937 or head to firstcoastconnect.org where you can find all the ways to connect with us and sign up for our new daily newsletter. Stick around. We'll be back right after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Ukrainian envoys have arrived in Geneva for the latest round of negotiations to end Russia's war on Ukraine. Representatives from the United States and Russia will also take part in the talks, though hurdles to a peace deal remain. NPR's Joanna Kikissis reports from Kyiv.
In his address at the Munich Security Conference this weekend, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the U.S. has told Ukraine that fighting can end quickly, but only with concessions.
And too often those concessions are discussed in the context only of Ukraine, not Russia.
The U.S. is pressing Ukraine to withdraw from the eastern region of Donbass, which Russia has been trying to occupy for more than 10 years. Zelensky added that his negotiating team will also bring up the idea of a ceasefire on energy infrastructure. Russia has attacked Ukraine's energy grid for months, leaving cities without heating and power during the coldest winter in recent years. Joanna Kikissis, NPR News.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio is wrapping up a trip to Europe, including stops in Slovakia and Hungary today. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports both countries are close allies of President Trump and have maintained ties to Russia, including reliance on Russian energy.
After addressing European leaders at the annual Munich Security Conference, Secretary Rubio made a short stop in Slovakia to discuss energy and security cooperation with Prime Minister Robert Fico, who met with Trump and Rubio in Florida last month.
Under President Trump, this administration is going to make not just Slovakia, but Central Europe a key component of how we engage the continent and the world.
Here in Budapest, his last stop, Rubio is meeting with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is a darling of Trump's MAGA movement for his anti-immigrant and Christian nationalist views. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Budapest.
U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright made a recent trip to Caracas as the Trump administration continues to assert a new role in Venezuela's energy sector and ease oil sanctions.
Chevron's on the ground right now. They are growing their production this month and next month. So it's happening right now. New American companies will be entering Venezuela in the next few months this year.
Wright's trip follows the U.S. military capture of ousted President Nicolas Maduro in early January, part of an operation that brought Maduro and his wife to the United States on federal charges. Since then, Washington has worked with interim President Delcy Rodriguez to open Venezuela's oil industry to foreign investment and boost production under what officials call a historic U.S.-Venezuela energy deal. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
You're listening to WJCT News, 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is 9:04. The city of Palatka will host a pair of community workshops today to discuss the redevelopment of the former Port Consolidated building and parking lot on Reed Street. The meetings are at 2 and 5:30 this afternoon at City Hall. The public and commercial developers are asked to share their thoughts to help shape the future of the site, which is near the riverfront and the Memorial Bridge. Invasive species in the Everglades have upended food webs, threatened birds, and wreaked havoc on landscapes and infrastructure. But Sofia Baltadano reports on how the loss of one such invasive species is actually putting an endangered bird at risk.
The snail kite feeds almost exclusively on freshwater apple snails. When droughts wiped out the native apple snails in the early 2000s, the birds survived by eating the more resilient invasive apple snails. But now those snails are disappearing too. Here's Paul Gray, a science coordinator for Audubon's Everglades Restoration Program.
Just as we thought the kites were going to be okay living off this exotic snail, now there's signs that they're not necessarily okay. The numbers are high, they're up in the few thousand, and we're happy about that. There's still all these warning signs that things aren't quite right.
Gray says water management is critical. Canals and drainage projects are drying wetlands, leaving too little water for the snails and for the snail kite. Scientists are now racing to count the remaining birds and understand why native snails haven't recovered. I'm Sophia Baltarano in Miami.
It'll be a cool afternoon here in Northeast Florida with breezy conditions, and drier air will move in.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include EBSCO, committed to providing colleges and universities with relevant online research databases to ensure student, faculty, and staff success. Learn more at ebsco.com. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, from the business suites of Rockefeller Plaza to the pine forests of southern St. Johns County, dramatic changes could be coming to local development. We explored some fast-moving bills in the legislature and how they could alter the face of the First Coast. Later in the program, how to recognize the signs of teen domestic violence and what to do when you see it. But first, several bills moving through the legislature could dramatically change how the state's remaining vacant lands are developed. Here to talk about it, we're joined by Kim Dinkins, environmental scientist and policy planning director for 1,000 Friends of Florida. Kim is a former senior planner with the Marion County Board of County Commissioners and an environmental consultant for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Kim, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're also joined by Jason Garcia, corporate accountability reporter who founded the digital news site and podcast Seeking Rents. He previously helped expose the dark money ghost candidate scheme in Florida's 2021 elections, which had significant local connections to the JEA scandal, something we've done a program on previously, and we have a link on our website if you're interested in more on that. But Jason Garcia, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Jason, it is just past the midpoint of the legislative session. How would you compare this session to prior years when it comes to the number and intensity of development-related bills?
Yeah, I think, I'd be curious Kim's thoughts on this too, but it struck me going into this session that we saw a far wider array of pro-development bills this year and a lot of really far-reaching ideas, all built around basically creating what is known as administrative approval, which is a fancy way of saying trying to create pathways for developers to get land rezoned for projects without any elected official ever having to vote on it, right? And so we're seeing a number of those kinds of bills move forward this year in a variety of ways. We're also seeing a number of preemptions, which means taking away powers of local governments to control things, to dictate terms of, development guidelines, rules around rezonings and that sort of thing. And we're even seeing legislation to undo voter approved growth control measures. So for instance, in Orange County, where I am in Orlando, we've got voters recently passed a rural boundary mechanism. There's legislation that is moving fairly rapidly through the state house that would essentially undo that.
And so is compared to what you've seen in the past, does that rank as significantly different or particularly concerning?
Yeah, I think there obviously the real estate lobby, the sort of the large development lobby is a significant force in Florida politics and has been certainly through my 25 years of doing this. What is different this year is I think sort of the focused nature on trying to get at, as I said, getting away from local votes, allowing developers to find ways to get around county commissions and city councils and town councils. This seems to be more intentional this year, and we are seeing it on a scale unlike anything, particularly in the context of one piece of legislation that would apply to properties of 10,000 acres or more, where you could essentially allow giant landowners to lock in development and title rights without ever going through any kind of local hearing or vote. And to my knowledge, that's completely unprecedented. I've certainly never seen legislation like that.
We're going to talk about that bill in much more depth in just a moment. But Kim, I want to bring you into the conversation. You've been tracking a few bills of particular concern for your group. Can you tell us which bills you've been watching and just very briefly kind of what those bills would do?
Yes, I think that I would start by just addressing one of the comments that Jason made about the kind of preemption on land use planning that's happening. One of the major bills that we tracked last year was Senate Bill 180, which passed. That was intended to address emergencies, but it really had broad, sweeping implications statewide. That's the bill that is now impacting the ability of Orange County, for example, to implement their voter initiated referendum for their rural lands.
And then can we just take a minute and stop on 180, because that's something that was supposed to be maybe reconsidered this legislative session, but it basically prevents counties from perhaps addressing flaws that they find when it comes to resiliency planning. So they are not allowed to make any changes to their comp plans or their development plans that specifically address how to harden against future storms or how to require tougher building codes.
Yeah, and if that were the only thing that it prevented, then we might be able to work within that, but it actually prevents any more restrictive or burdensome regulations on any topics. And so in Orange County specifically, they passed a referendum that said that their county commissioners would have to vote with a majority plus one of a vote to change any land use in a rural boundary area that they had designated. It was a geographic area. And again, the voters approved it. I think it was a 73% approval rate. And when the county sent their new comprehensive plan that reflected that vote up to the Department of Commerce told them that they couldn't implement it. So we're really seeing implications on, the real world scenarios where voters' voices are being suppressed by that bill in particular. And Senator DeSigley from Pinellas County did introduce some legislation this year that would roll back some of those prohibitions and really make it focused on the resilience, on the emergencies type of allow local governments to address those emergency type situations and roll back some of the provisions in Senate Bill 180. That is moving through the House. Through the Senate. It's going to be heard this week, but the House has yet to take up a companion on that one.
Which doesn't bode well for its success.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's what's happening with this year's action on last year's bill. Let's talk about some of this year's bills that you're watching right now. One in particular that Jason mentioned is this Blue Ribbon Projects bill, Senate Bill 354 and House Bill 299. And basically, tell us, first of all, about the person who introduced it and how it would change how we currently approve large-scale projects.
Yep. So the Senate sponsor of that bill is Senator Stan McClain, and then he's from Marion County, and the House sponsor is Representative Mello, and she is from the Naples area. It really would bypass any local approval for, as Jason said, any development that is 10,000 acres or more, as long as the developer agreed to essentially cluster its development on 40% of the property.
And that essentially is one of the bills. There's also something that is kind of a smaller version of that. That's these agricultural enclaves. Tell us about that bill.
Yeah, we saw this last year. We're seeing it again in a little bit different form this year, kind of rolled back, but it also would allow, as we've mentioned before, these administrative approvals of properties that are specifically kind of on the urban fringe. They're still agricultural in nature, but they have some urban type development around them. They would be administratively approved for residential development.
Meaning that there would not be public hearings, there would not be any involvement of the county commission. When you say administratively approved, it's just a staffer in the planning office?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so that would be agricultural enclaves that perhaps are farmland, and you say that are adjacent to land that has been developed, but in fact, it could be land that just has been approved for development. So it is a truly undeveloped area of a county, perhaps,
yes,
that might all of a sudden be required to rubber stamp approval of a development.
Absolutely. It could be an area that is empty, that's brand new development, or it could be adjacent to a development that might have been historic in nature, that was there before our comprehensive planning process came into being. It doesn't maybe have the infrastructure that's necessary, but because it's developed that way, the adjacent land could develop that way as well.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about some legislation that is moving through the legislature right now. It has to do with growth and development in Florida. And if you'd like to join the conversation, you can give us a call on air at 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org to find ways to connect with us on social and via email. Jason, one of the great things about your reporting is that you bring a little context and help us make a little sense of why this is happening. And you've really done some granular level digging into the lawmakers that are introducing this legislation, the money that they've been receiving from whom, and then trying to track all of that down to its source. So it's a complicated story, and I don't want to get into all of the nitty gritty, but can you give us sort of a big picture sense as to what your reporting has found when it comes to this blue ribbon projects bill in particular? This is the one that would affect lands that are 10,000 acres or more.
Yeah. So you're right. It is sort of there's a complex sort of corporate weave here, but essentially, so this Blue Ribbons Project legislation, and again, this is the legislation for the largest landowners in Florida, is being pushed through Tallahassee primarily by this really obscure entity that sort of popped out of nowhere and immediately hired nearly 24 lobbyists in Tallahassee to work this legislation. And it is, it's, the name of it is just as obscure as the entity itself. It's called Big Lands Transect Collaborative LLC, right? Like, what does that mean? But we were able to pull some records out of Texas that eventually led us on a trail to, it is controlled by executives at a New York investment firm, a firm that manages mutual funds and hedge funds. And as we got there, then we were able to figure out other companies through other landowning entities. This same New York investment firm has amassed more than 80,000 acres of land across North Florida, including huge clusters, by the way, of more than 10,000 acres around Jacksonville, around St. Augustine, and around Panama City. And so you're talking about this firm that has developed these giant holdings and is now lobbying for legislation that would, if this were to pass, again, you've created a pathway to lock in automatic development entitlements that would have an enormous impact on the value of that land. And sort of the third piece to this is as we were finally able to put together the corporate entities all leading back to this firm, which, by the way, is called Ruane Cunniff and Goldfarb is the name of this firm. One of the entities that it controls has also recently begun showering campaign contributions onto key legislators. So we found, we won't, because of the timing of campaign finance reporting, we won't have a comprehensive picture of all the money that has gone into the system ahead of this session. But we have found that one of the entities controlled by this company has already donated more than $150,000 to key figures in Florida politics as part of the lobbying campaign for this. This includes $10,000 each to the two bill sponsors that Kim mentioned, Stan McClain in Ocala and Lauren Mello in Naples. It also includes $25,000 to the Speaker of the House, Danny Perez, a Republican from Miami. So there is an enormous amount of money being put behind this bill, which would obviously make an enormous amount of money for this investment firm that owns so much rural land across North Florida.
And one of those $10,000 donations went to a local lawmaker here in Northeast Florida, Representative Wyman Duggan, who's a Republican here in Jacksonville, and who also works or is a partner at a law firm that represents Ruane Cunniff, which is...
Yeah, that's right. So Ruane Cunniff is represented in Florida by Rogers Towers, a law firm in Jacksonville, and Wyman Duggan is a partner there.
Okay. And one thing that's interesting is you said that, there's this Transect, Big Lands Transect Collective. The other companies that you found that were connected to this, also acquiring huge tracts of land, are companies known as First Coast Land and Timber and Jack's Palatka Farms, LLC, and Waco West Jacksonville, which may have a similar connection. Basically, what you're finding is all of these companies trace back to either the same principals, the people signing the documents, or the same address here in Jacksonville on Gate Parkway.
Yeah, that's right. To put this together, what we had to do was go through all sorts of land records where you find easement agreements or deeds and stuff, and you start to see the same names come up together. And so we were able to match up signatures. We were able to match up addresses. In some cases, someone might have a relatively common name, but they would sign it, and it's the name that matches someone at Ruane Cunniff. But then the two witnesses and the notary were all also names that matched those of people at Ruane Cunniff. And often, in a number of cases, the the lawyer signing off on documents was the general counsel at Ruane Cunniff. So that we were able to sort of like fit all those pieces together and to sort of tie it all back to this company. And I should know we made so many efforts to reach out to Ruane Cunniff to comment on all of this. We told them exactly what we were going to report. We reached out through their attorneys at Rogers Towers. We reached out directly through the company and to multiple executives by phone, by email, all sorts of ways. They declined to comment on any of this stuff. The other piece I will mention here that was fascinating to me as we did this was there is a very familiar pattern in all of these in that they seem to have been targeting giant tracts of rural land owned by kind of agricultural companies looking to sort of like monetize some of their land. So for instance, the land around Jacksonville and St. Augustine, a lot of that was bought from Rainier, the timber company. More of it was bought from the Reinhold Corporation, which is the largest private landowner in Clay County. And then out in Panama City, out in Washington County, they purchased giant tracts of land from essentially a charitable trust that had been set up by the founder of the Knight Ridder newspaper chain. And so they're buying these kind of like historic, agricultural or just like long-term holders of these land that have these enormous things, that have these enormous tracts, and buying big chunks of that as pretty clearly obvious investments. And they've done a little bit of development around this stuff in the past. So like, for instance, a piece in St. Augustine was sold off to Love's for a big truck stop in St. Augustine. Another piece in the Panhandle is being developed by a golf course developer now into a destination golf course. But it's pretty clear with this legislation that they've got sort of longer term ambitions to do a lot more with the land than they've done so far.
And worth mentioning that some of the land that you found connected to this is in Baker County, and it was purchased by the Cummer family, which is the name sort of behind the Cummer Museum here, but as a history, as a large land holding and
that's right,
timber company. So I want to ask you about you say in your reporting there's not that many landholders in Florida that have over a 10,000 acre chunk or more to develop or just to have. And the property that is in St. Johns County is focused mostly in southern St. Johns County, in the area between I-95 and US 1, between State Road 207 or County Road 207 and County Road 206. And so it's a chunk of land. People who live in that area will know it as around Pedro Menendez High School. And there previously was an attempt to develop that land, a big project called King's Grant, which locals objected to and successfully defeated. It was a 999 home community. So there is some record of what the community thinks about large-scale development in that area, which is still largely undeveloped. But this bill, this Blue Ribbon Projects bill, could exclude the public, essentially. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's really fascinating that you mentioned this. I haven't gotten into this I didn't get into this into the story we wrote about this because it was already so monstrously long. But there's evidence that shows that Ruane Cunniff was actively involved in 2024 St. Johns County Commission elections, where there seemed like I'm not in St. Johns County, but from reading the clips of going back through all that, it seems like there was a real like sort of pro-growth, slow-growth slate of candidates, and they were involved very heavily, it seems like, on behalf of the pro-development candidates, and 2 of the 3 of their candidates lost. And so there is a part of me that wonders if that may have played a role in deciding like, okay, well, we are losing at the local level, so what we need to do is take the local level out of this entirely.
Oh, that's interesting. And so I want to talk, Kim, about what specifically the requirements of this bill would provide for, this Blue Ribbon Projects bill, because it has been not just sold by its supporters, but actually reported by some media as a conservation bill. This is going to help make sure that large landowners are setting aside 60% of their land for conservation. That's kind of what's being said and reported. The language of the bill doesn't say anything about conservation specifically requirement. It calls it reserve land. What does that mean?
That's correct. And so that is kind of one of the big questions is what does that mean? The way that the bill reads now, as you mentioned, it's just called reserved land. Nothing that specifies that it has to be conservation. It would allow certain utilities to be there. In the last revision, the amendment that was recently filed, it says that there can't be data centers, but it doesn't mean that there can't be large solar farms or electrical substations or other things. It doesn't necessarily require that there's public access. It doesn't require that it's even contiguous. So it could be little pockets of even wetlands that wouldn't be developable anyway. So there's lots of questions about what that actually would look like.
Just to kind of spell that out a little further. So, there are restrictions on certain lands. If they're wetlands, they're not to be developed, or if they are to be developed, there's a lot of hoops that developers have to jump through, theoretically.
Correct.
Payments or mitigation banks. In this scenario, if you had to set aside a portion of land, the wetlands would count towards that. So that conceivably could be part of that 60% of reserve land. But you mentioned data centers, and that's interesting because one of the uses that this would allow for in the reserve land is utilities. And there has been discussion, I guess, prompting this most recent revision that specifically excludes data centers, because initially it was, it perhaps would have been allowed, something as intensive as a data center in what is otherwise being described as conservation land.
Correct. Yeah.
And so has anything else been specifically excluded like data centers, or would we still be allowed to see utility uses like power line easements or wastewater treatment plants or the location of any kind of utility function?
Yeah, the only thing that is specifically excluded are the data centers and golf courses.
Golf courses, okay. And so I thought it was interesting that one of the lawmakers here from Jacksonville, Dean Black, Jason, who is not, he's certainly one of the more conservative members of the legislature, had raised concerns about this bill specific to the issue of solar farms. And he basically said you could, put solar farm, cover the entire site of 60% of the land and count that as reserve land, which would obviously not meet most people's definition of conservation land.
Yeah, that's right. And to sort of illustrate the absurdity of it right now, in the last hearing where they added this amendment to sort of say, okay, well, we can't do golf courses or data centers. The sponsor was specifically asked, well, what about like just other recreational facilities like tennis courts and stuff that get built as part of like just any kind of like housing development nowadays? And he said, yeah, that could count under this. So like the idea, and they also acknowledged that like retention ponds, like just kind of the stormwater infrastructure you have to build anyway as part of a development, would count towards this reserve area. So to the point that you and Kim were just discussing, it is like wide open what could qualify as a reserve area here, and very little of it would have to actually be conservation land. And the way it's written, none of it would have to be particularly valuable conservation land. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that Dean Black expressed some concerns here. This is an interesting bill in that you are seeing the pushback is not just like, this isn't a Republican Democrat issue necessarily. Like, for instance, one of the early no votes against it was a Republican representative from the St. Augustine area, Kim Kendall. And I think that's an awareness that one of the targets of this development is the St. Augustine area. So you are seeing kind of an interesting shifting alliances on this as it works its way through the legislature, and that it's not just breaking down on sort of traditional conservative liberal lines.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to Kim Dinkins of 1,000 Friends of Florida and investigative reporter Jason Garcia about development bills moving through the Florida legislature. You can join us at 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org. We have a call from Alan on the south side. Good morning, Alan. Go ahead.
And thanks for taking my call. I'm hoping to get your guest to comment on the sense of any type of a grassroots effort against this, on the order of like with the golf courses and pickleball courts with the state parks, a year ago. That this sounds like corruption on the highest level, and not just that. It's Yankee wanky. When I first moved there, Yankee Go Home was all over the place, and I don't know if there's still a sense of that if Florida's been so domesticated by the North. But this sounds like something that the people would really rise up in arms. Like you said, 73% vote in Orange County.
Yeah. Thanks, Alan, for the question. I mean, we have seen, Kim, that when voters are asked their perspective on development issues, they typically are they at least mouth the words that they are interested in slower growth, less intensive growth, more public participation, and perhaps more deference to what the locals want in terms of how something looks.
Yeah, absolutely. Overwhelmingly, when Floridians are asked about their conservation values, they will always advocate for more conservation land, more land and protection, less sprawl, less type development. And I would just say that not only does this Blue Ribbon Bill is run counter to that, so does the ag enclaves. I mean, those are specifically aimed at projects that people in St. Johns County and other areas have said they don't want. And so they're sort of bypassing this local desire to take it to the state level.
And so what do the lawmakers say when you meet with them? I mean, we mentioned that the Ocala lawmaker, the senator that has sponsored this, Stan McLean, and is it Lauren Mello?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, she's a realtor. He's a developer. What do they say when you sit down with them and say, look, public has made clear that they're not interested in, rapid sprawling development in their counties. Why are you proposing this?
The interesting thing is that both of them will say they don't want sprawl either, which is completely, again, counter to what the bills say. They do oftentimes link it back to property rights, but I would, again, counter to that the property that we're talking about is agricultural or natural in nature. It's not entitled necessarily for development, and so these speculative buyers don't have a right to that type of development in Florida without the local approval.
Well, so when you say they don't have a right, there have been traditionally plans that counties go through, these comprehensive plans where they designate areas. This is going to be an industrial area, this is going to be an agricultural rural area, and those dictate what can be built there traditionally.
Yes.
But we do know that the agency that was overseeing whether counties are actually following their own comprehensive plans and their land use plans was abolished years ago under Rick Scott when he was the governor of the state.
Right.
So the Department of Community Affairs no longer exists. Initially, the argument was, well, we want to give the control back to the local people.
Right. And the Department of Community Affairs is now, it's gone through a lot of iterations. It's essentially called the Department of Commerce. And under the Blue Ribbons bill, there would be some oversight. The Department of Commerce would have to give the first approval for whether or not a project would qualify as a Blue Ribbon project. But as folks mentioned in testimony during the last hearing, that agency isn't set up to do that type of review any longer.
And I mean, the idea that they're dismantling the Department of Community Affairs to give local governments more control is sort of counter to what the current movement is, which is essentially to reclaim that local control in Tallahassee, take it away from the counties.
Right. The pendulum has certainly swung the opposite direction.
Yeah. We've got a message from Lisa on Facebook. She says, Jason Garcia is a phenomenal investigative reporter in covering the legislature. I recommend subscribing to Seeking Rents to have excellent insight into what's happening in our state government. That has a huge impact on the citizens of Florida. So much is disturbing, nefarious, and gets hidden under the radar, and that is intentional. I hope to see Jason Garcia on First Coast Connect regularly. People need to be informed. It's probably a good point, Jason, just to explain to people what Seeking Rents mean, because not everybody knows. That's the name of your podcast and your publication.
Yeah. And I swear to God, I did not, I'm not behind that.
You're not Lisa on Facebook.
That's really, I mean, she sounds very intelligent. So it's funny. I've got, my entire chosen family loves to tease me about the name I chose, that it sounds like an apartment seeking website, but it actually comes from a term in economics called rent seeking. And rent seeking is what's happening when someone with lots of wealth and influence uses their wealth and influence to get laws changed in their favor in a way that allows them to capture even more wealth and influence for themselves. So, this Blue Ribbon Projects legislation would sort of qualify as a classic example of rent seeking.
So we've talked about some of these bills that are concerning, and I think it's probably appropriate to talk about some bright spots in what's happening legislatively right now, Kim, and I'd ask you to catch us up on a couple of those. One of them is a bill that was introduced by Kim Kendall. We mentioned she's from St. Johns County, and that's House Bill 441. This is something that grew out of a really kind of locally a big scandal about selling off lands in the Guana River Wildlife Management Area. Can you tell us what that bill would provide for and why you're celebrating it?
We're happy to see, because it is another opportunity to ensure that the public has adequate notice when the state is going to consider selling off or trading state lands. So last year when we had not just Guana, but the project that would have allowed golf courses in certain state parks gave the public very short notice to respond and very limited ability to talk with their decision makers. And so this would give 30 days notice for any of those decisions before they come before the panels.
And it would be required that they make that public. And this really was, as you said, the last time when the Guana River was under discussion and set for approval, it was just maybe like 5 days, right?
Right.
Yeah. There's also this decades-long effort to restore the Ocklawaha River, require removing the Kirkpatrick Dam at Rodman Reservoir, and essentially that would restore the flow of the river from west to east and into the St. Johns River.
Right. Yeah.
So it got close last year, or at least a provision that would have required DEP to study that.
Funding and studying.
And the governor vetoed it. So what first of all is happening with the bill right now in both houses?
Well, the exciting news is that the bills have passed both houses and are ready for a floor vote in both chambers. This year's effort really is about not only restoring the river, but ensuring that the local communities have a say in how that happens. So the river would be restored, but there's also a plan for economic development and different recreational opportunities, and then a grant program that is currently unfunded, but would allow some of the funding for those projects to move forward.
And the idea there is that we understand that removing this reservoir, which a lot of people love for fishing, would cause some harm to people in perhaps Putnam County, economic harm.
Right. Immediate economic harm. I mean, obviously restoring the river and bringing those tributaries back would provide other opportunities for recreational outside activities, but the bass fishing community would be hit.
And so the goal of this legislation would be to try to provide some support for those communities as that process is happening.
Correct. Yeah.
Jason, I'd just ask you to kind of wrap us up here. Not everybody has the ability to do the sort of deep dive that you've been doing, or the understanding of how all of those things are working together. Obviously, learning about it is one thing that's helpful for people, and they can learn about it through the work that you're doing. But what would you advise people to do if they're interested in doing more, if they're concerned about preventing some of these bills from passing?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound so basic as to be embarrassing, but like, contact your legislator, make sure they hear from you. We just saw we didn't talk about this in the context of this discussion, but there's been legislation moving through Tallahassee that, among other things, would make it easier for the state's big sugar growers to sue like critics for libel, for defamation and libel. And we just saw that provision defeated in the Florida Senate by like a coalition of essentially grassroots activists that kind of like united like fishing guides and environmental groups with MAHA activists and wellness influencers. So that this kind of pushback can make a difference. Like, just hearing from constituents about an issue lets legislators know that they're paying attention to that issue, and the vast majority of this stuff passes without anybody being aware of it, right? So reaching out, encouraging, organizing other neighbors to reach out, friends, family, coworkers, get them to contact your legislator. Start with your own. The legislator that represents you is always going to be the most responsive, but reach out to others too. I mean, these or activist groups that arrange these email campaigns, they do it for a reason, because it does actually have an effect, even when there's a powerful special interest pushing on the other side. And obviously Tallahassee is a chore to get to for places, but showing up at meetings, that also has an effect, because it does show sort of passion around an issue. It shows that this isn't just you aren't just clicking an email, right? You are actually engaged enough over this. This is moving you enough to show up into this out of the way town, right? So just essentially anything you can do to make sure your elected officials know you are paying attention to how they will vote on this, that really does have a difference, particularly when it comes on a mass level.
Jason Garcia, he's an investigative reporter with Seeking Rents. You can subscribe to his Substack and his podcast for free. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Enjoyed the discussion.
And Kim Dinkins with 1,000 Friends of Florida. Kim, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, domestic violence in teen dating. We talk to a survivor about the realities and the resources available. Welcome back. Roughly 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Astoundingly, the same percentage of teens report it just between the ages of 15 and 19. It's a statistic that can establish lifelong patterns and cause relationship disruptions. Here to tell us how to recognize and respond to the signs of teen dating violence is Stephanie Brown, Director of Community Education at Hubbard House. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Tanya, a survivor of teen domestic violence. Tanya, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So, Tanya, you have been doing some speaking as part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You did a presentation at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office in sharing your story. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience and why you thought it would be appropriate to share it this year?
At 15, I met my abuser. I had already been a part of violence because I was abused as a child. And the violence carried on with my abuser because all my childhood was violent. And because my childhood was violent, my abuser was able to carry on with that violence. And I wanted to make sure that teens understand that it's not okay to have that abuse because my abuser was able to hone in on the fact that my parents were divorced and I was coping with their divorce and going through a phase of understanding that I felt like my parents didn't want me. And he was able to hone in on that fact of feeling unwanted, unloved, rejected, nobody wanting me. And he honed in on that fact at 15. And I had lived a sheltered life because I was brought up with a lot of love because my parents were married up until I was probably 12. And they showered me with a lot of love. And when they divorced, they never explained to me, hey, we're getting divorced. We still love you, but we're just not getting along. And when they got divorced, I just felt like nobody wanted me. So when I met him, it was, hey, I love you. Hey, I want you. I want to be around you. Hey, let's just make this work. And at 15, I was like, hey, I done finally met someone that loves me, want to be around me. And I can remember the first time he hit me at 15 because I didn't have nowhere to go. I had to go live with him because I couldn't live with my dad anymore. So at 15, I'm living with him and I'm getting beat on every single day at 15 years old, getting smacked around, beaten the head. I'm not in school no more. I was a straight A student. And I'm getting beat on every single day because I'm feeling like I have no one. And I'm really wanting parents to have that open communication with their kids to let them know that it's not okay, even if it's not just puppy love, it's not just any of that. Keep that communication open with your children because you don't know what that person is capable of hearing, of them saying, hey, I love you, because you don't know if that person actually do love them, what they're wanting out of them. That love word can go, especially for me, that love word was a trigger because I wanted that love. And you don't know what they're feeling, what that teenager is feeling.
Tanya, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that you did go through that. Stephanie, how common is that kind of scenario where an abuser is exploiting someone's existing vulnerabilities? And how often are these situations just developed in the absence of those preconditions?
The matter of fact is, if there is any kind of a vulnerability, an abusive person will find it and exploit it. And when you think of a teenager, there are some unique things that can make them vulnerable that most people may not realize. It could be that they're coming from maybe a home life that is dangerous or normalizes violence. And so an abuser says that, well, what else can you expect? Violence is normal. But it could even be that perfect grade A student, that person who is trying to be the best, and an abuser makes them feel responsible for the relationship and says, you're not being a good enough partner. If I'm hurting you, it means you deserved it. And so it truly is all ends of the spectrum that we can see those preconditions that may enhance that vulnerability.
This is a period where people are learning about love and relationships and dependence and all kinds of things for the first time in many cases. How formative is it when people are experiencing violence and abuse in those early relationships?
It is absolutely something that they can carry later into life. And so one of our key messages this month as part of Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month is to help the general public as well as the teen themselves understand that this is not a phase. Adults have such a tendency to look at teen relationships as something that's not going to last. It's the puppy love, it's the high school sweetheart, it's something they're going to grow out of. And because we look at it as this phase, we may not take it as seriously as we need to. And what if that relationship does last? Or what if the beliefs and the patterns and the habits that this teen is exposed to as part of this relationship is something that does inform how they carry relationships into the future? If a teenager thinks that they deserve violence in their relationship as a teenager, it becomes easier for us to understand how they may feel that way even with a different relationship later in life.
I mean, kids are notoriously secretive when it comes to their young love life in many cases. They're not necessarily eager to open up to their parents about any of it, much less something that might cause the parent to want to end the relationship or force them to not see that person anymore. So how do you advise parents to approach this? What should they be looking for? And if they suspect something's wrong, how do they do it in a way that doesn't just further push the child away?
Yeah. And it is challenging. We likely all reflect on our teenage years, and at least a part of that, we may have been rebellious. We may have had relationships that we wanted to hide. It's part of being a teenager is finding your identity, and you may not want your parent to be a part of all of that. What we encourage is first and foremost prevention. Meaning, if you can try to create a culture in your home where you have an open exchange with your teenager, where you bring up the topics that maybe feel more taboo, where you talk openly about their friends and you get invested in how the people in their lives are. If you start to normalize those kind of conversations before there's a need, then it enhances the likelihood that they'll feel safe coming to you when there is that need. Or maybe you're the one who starts to see the warning signs that a teen hasn't seen. Imagine again those teen relationships. An abuser may do the overwhelming gestures and statements of love, like Tanya talked about, making that teen feel like there's nowhere else or nobody else to turn to. For a new relationship, that could feel like love. But for us on the outside, we could see that as an incredible amount of control. If you notice your teen is always on their phone, which again, something a lot of teens do, but what if it's because their partner is always texting and they feel like they have to answer right away? They get nervous if they let that call go to voicemail. They feel like they have to share their location with their partner. Those are the kind of things that can be those warning signs for us. And so if you're that parent and you see those signs, approaching the teen again in a compassionate way, in a non-judgmental way, letting them know why you're worried about their safety, what specifically you have seen, and that you are there to help them.
We're going to have to leave it there. We've got a full screen up if you want some information about resources. Stephanie Brown, Tanya, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
We'll be back in just a moment.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Accidents can happen when you least expect it. For decades, our attorneys have dug out the facts to help juries decide who's at fault.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. Florida Theater presents Celtic Woman. The 4 Irish vocalists will perform classic and modern songs accompanied by dancers and an ensemble featuring traditional Celtic instruments. Sunday, March 29th at 7 p.m. Tickets and information available at floridatheater.com. Here Tomorrow provides no-cost, no-wait suicide prevention services in our community. The nonprofit will host its 5-year celebration, A Night of Promise, on March 21st. Tickets and information available at heretomorrow.org.
It's the sound of trust, of calm, of clarity. The sound of WJCT News 89.9, bringing the world to Jacksonville every morning with NPR and local reporting that leads the way.
Manuscripts, music, maps, the Library of Congress preserves them all, but also
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
movies.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I am C-3PO, human cyborg relations.
I'm Amory Sievertson, the movies that have shaped our history and culture.
To infinity and beyond!
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Experts warn that AI bots could influence our elections this year. As more people turn to social media for their news, bots, AI-generated images, and disinformation are becoming inescapable. How can social media and AI sow division and impact the outcome at the polls? Social media, AI, and our democracy. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. It's been 126 years since the children of Jacksonville came together in honor of Abraham Lincoln's birthday to perform a new song. Composed by Jacksonville artists and brothers James Weldon and John Rosamond Johnson, the song would go on to be known as the Black National Anthem. Here to tell us about its anniversary performance, we are joined by Katie Bowling, Director of Operations at the Jacksonville Children's Chorus. Katie, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
We're also joined by a member of the chorus's touring choir, Elizabeth. Thanks for being here.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, Katie, right out of the gate, this song has captured the hearts of audiences. It was first performed by 500 school children at the old Stanton School. Why is it restaged every year?
Well, I think, it's part of the history of Jacksonville. And I do feel like it's had a bit of a resurgence, at least locally. I grew up in Jacksonville. I am ashamed to say I did not know the song growing up until I started working with the Jacksonville Children's Chorus about 10 or so years ago. And I just have loved seeing how important it is to the organization, and they've made it really important. You cannot come and be a part of the Children's Chorus whether you're in 2nd grade or 12th grade, without leaving knowing this song. Am I right, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Yeah.
We start learning it as soon as we start in the choir, and it's been with me since I'm graduating this year.
Yeah, and it's a huge piece of Jacksonville history, and so that's great that it's a part of the choir's lineup and the chorus's lineup. And, to your point, I mean, Beyonce performed it at Coachella. It was on her live album Homecoming, and so its reach, its significance has perhaps penetrated more deeply into pop culture than it had been. And I think Jacksonville's doing a better job of recognizing it. What is it that is, I mean, it can be a challenging song to sing. Is that right? It's not necessarily, it is somewhat long, Elizabeth, and it has got some, musically it can be challenging to sing.
Especially the arrangement we sing. We sing the original arrangement, and we have sections where it's loud, sections where you really feel the emotion of it in the slower parts. And at least when we learned it when we were younger, we learned one section that's easier for us. And as we grow our ability to reach, whether that be lower notes or our higher ranges, we get to sing the other parts of it. So it's been fun learning how to sing it. And I'd say out of our whole song, it's one of my favorite songs we've been able to sing in my time in the choir, just being able to have it with me.
The song is sometimes sung in portions, as you say, and taught in portions. And there are some verses that are really emotionally challenging. I mean, they're just very, wrenching descriptions of challenging life, of African Americans throughout history. And there's obviously moments that are a lot more celebratory and, positive, but I would think just even the emotional range of the song is probably something to work through as a vocalist.
Definitely. Even the more cheerful arrangements of it, at least in the portions, it talks about like how stony the road we trod, when like hope unborn has died. And even at the end, it's like, lest our feet, whatever happens, will come out good in the end. So, like, of course, as we're younger, we don't always hear the verses, but being able to listen to it and sing it so many times, you start to really be able to see how important the song is.
Well, we have a brief clip of the children's chorus performing this. Let's just take a listen. KT's telling me that that's not actually the children's choir, and so I'm not sure that clip played, I guess, incorrectly.
That is the children's choir, but that's not Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Gotcha.
It is confusing because that is a song called Lift Every Voice that our younger choir sings. That was the training choir.
Gotcha.
So there are some clips of the full arrangement of Lift Every Voice and Sing on our YouTube. I think it's more recognizable than that song you just heard too.
And so this is not just the children's chorus, but it's a collaborative effort with a couple of other vocal groups. Tell us about who all's participating.
Yeah. Actually, as Elizabeth was talking about the emotions, it's a very dynamic song. You mentioned Beyonce has sung it. I think we've heard it more in pop culture these days than when I was growing up, at least. And no matter who sings it, it can be very emotional. But if you haven't heard it sung by a group, by a choir, it just hits different. It chills. I've heard this song probably, several dozen times, and I get chills every time. So each year for our annual Lift Every Voice and Sing Martin Luther King Celebration Concert, which is in February, this year it's February 28th, we typically will bring a choir from an HBCU from outside of the city.
So that's Edward Waters.
So this year, yes, we're going to have Edward Waters. So this year's a little bit different because we're actually bringing ensembles from within the community. We have Edward Waters, FSCJ, and the Rich Chamber Players will be joining us. In the past, we've had Spelman, Hampton, Tuskegee, Bethune-Cookman.
All right. Well, it is the Martin Luther King Jr. Lift Every Voice and Sing concert. As you said, it's February 28th from 2 to 4 at Hendricks Avenue Baptist Church. KT Bowling, Elizabeth, thank you both so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. Join us tomorrow when we discuss the EPA's radical reversal of climate science and its impact on pollution emissions and public health. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Florida Theater presents jazz trumpeter Chris Bodie. A member of Sting's touring band, before going solo, Bodie fuses his jazz roots with a pop music flair. Sunday, February 22nd at 7 p.m. Tickets and information available at floridatheater.com.
This is WJCT News.